If someone were to ask me about the biggest mistake of my life, I wouldn't say it was the affair. No, that mistake was just a symptom of a much more serious disease, an unbelievable level of complacency and blindness. For 35 years, I lived with a woman I thought I knew like the back of my hand, but it turned out I knew nothing about her at all. My name is Richard Peterson, and this is the story of how I single-handedly destroyed everything. That fateful day began like any other. I came home to find my wife, Eleanor, bustling in the kitchen. The familiar scent of pot roast, a dish she had cooked for me thousands of times, filled the house. I sat down at the dining table, where I had sat for 3 decades, and with a foolish confidence that now makes me want to punch myself in the face, I began to speak. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. "I think I found my soulmate." I was prepared for anything. Tears, screams, accusations. But Eleanor did nothing. She just slowly put down the ladle, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to look at me. Her smile, a slow and enigmatic smile, sent a chill down my spine. I continued, talking about Tiffany, the woman I believed was my true love. I praised her simplicity, her earthiness, saying she wasn't like Eleanor, not interested in extravagant material things. I said those words cruelly, as if comparing 2 pieces of merchandise, without realizing I was insulting the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for me. When I finished, expecting a dramatic reaction, Eleanor only smiled more serenely. Then she spoke, her voice unnervingly calm, directed towards the living room. "Miss Davies, would you mind coming in here for a moment?" I was stunned. Who was Ms. Davies? I vaguely remembered her as the woman who occasionally came to help Eleanor with paperwork, someone I'd always dismissed as a trivial part-time assistant. Mrs.
Davies walked in, holding a folder, her expression professional and cold. Eleanor looked straight at her, not even glancing at me, and commanded in a frighteningly composed voice, "Ms. Davies, freeze all joint accounts, cancel my mother's private insurance policy, and change all the passwords." My world stopped spinning. "What accounts? What the hell are you doing?" I stammered, my confidence vanishing like a soap bubble. Eleanor finally turned to me, her eyes devoid of their familiar warmth, replaced by a cold strangeness. "I'm doing what I have to do, Richard, and this is just the beginning." At that moment, I still didn't get it. I, a 68-year-old man, a successful salesman, still believed I was in control. I didn't know I had just ignited a war I had no chance of winning. I didn't know that the woman I had just cast aside was not a simple housewife, but a force I could never have imagined. To understand my foolishness, you have to understand how blind I once was. The woman I called my wife for 35 years, her name was Eleanor Thorne. Thorne. A powerful name. A name I had heard hundreds of times, but never truly considered the meaning behind it. To me, she was simply Eleanor Peterson, the woman in the kitchen, my mother's caregiver. I met her when we were in our early 30s. Eleanor was the chief financial officer for a large corporation in Chicago. She owned a luxurious 2-bedroom condo, drove a nice car, and had a life many men would envy. I saw her confidence, her sharp intellect. But instead of admiring it, my foolish ego saw it as a challenge. I was Richard, a salesman with a slick smile and sweet words. I used every trick in my book to pursue her, viewing the conquest of a woman like Eleanor as the pinnacle of achievement. I still remember our wedding day vividly. We were married in a beautiful, historic church. When Eleanor walked down the aisle in an exquisite lace gown, I cried. I vowed before God to love and cherish her for the rest of my life. And perhaps, in that moment, I truly believed my own vows. The first few years were genuinely happy. We worked together, built a life together, and bought a cozy little condo near Lincoln Park. But then, the seeds of destruction were sown. My mother, Martha, moved in with us. My father had passed away, leaving her with very little savings. To me, it was a given that we would take care of her. But we quickly became Eleanor. My mother was a difficult woman, one who believed no one was good enough for her golden boy. She never truly accepted Eleanor, and I, cowardly, let it happen. I started traveling more for work, partly for business, but mostly to escape the tension at home. I left Eleanor alone to deal with my mother. I convinced her to quit her job, telling her it was just temporary to care for my mother, that she was in a fragile state. That temporary lasted for 30 years. I had turned the brilliant, independent woman I once pursued into an unpaid maid for my own mother. I watched as she gradually lost her spark, her sharpness, sinking into the routine of housework, cooking, and caring for a woman who never had a kind word for her. I saw it all, but I chose not to see. I chose my own comfort over my responsibility as a husband. And that is where the tragedy began. My business trips became more frequent and longer. A week in Dallas, 2 weeks in Denver, sometimes a whole month in Miami. I told myself I was working hard for the family, that I was the provider, the one bringing home the money. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. I was running away. Every time I came home, I found an increasingly tired Eleanor and an increasingly nagging mother. The house that was once a sanctuary now felt like a prison of unspoken obligations. And I blamed Eleanor. Instead of looking at my own selfishness, I decided she had changed. I saw a woman who no longer dressed up, no longer wore makeup, a person whose life revolved around my mother's medication schedule and the grocery list. I had forgotten that I was the one who cast her in that role. I complained that she had let herself go, while it was my mother's presence and my own neglect that had drained the life out of her. In that blindness, I failed to notice one crucial thing. While I was busy making money, it was Eleanor who was actually managing it. She handled all the bills, the investments, my mother's medical expenses. I was never good with numbers. I just knew how to sell and generate revenue. I gave her the money and believed she was simply a good keeper of the purse. I would proudly boast to my friends, I trust my wife completely with our finances. I didn't know that my trust, or rather my laziness and ignorance, was the very noose tightening around my neck. And then Tiffany appeared. She was a receptionist at a hotel I frequented. Tiffany was young, maybe in her early 40s, with a constant smile and an adoring gaze for me. With her, I was no longer the tired man coming home from a business trip. I was Richard Peterson, a successful businessman from Chicago, a man trapped in a loveless marriage with a cold, pragmatic wife. I painted a completely false picture of Eleanor for Tiffany. I told her she only cared about money, that she had turned into a bitter old woman. I turned my self-sacrificing wife into the villain to justify my own betrayal. The affair became my escape. The sweet texts, the secret dates in fancy restaurants, the expensive gifts. It all made me feel alive again. I used the very money Eleanor was carefully managing to fund my double life, oblivious to the fact that every transaction, every receipt, was evidence against me. I was lost in that illusion, believing I could control everything, and that when the time came, I could easily cast Eleanor aside to start a new life. I didn't know that not only did Eleanor know everything, but she was also waiting. Looking back now, the signs were as clear as day, but I was too lost in my own world to notice. Eleanor didn't change suddenly on the day I confessed. Her transformation was a quiet process, a meticulous preparation hidden behind the facade of a long-suffering wife. I remember how foolish I was. The phone I used to toss around carelessly became an extension of my hand. I would smile while texting Tiffany, thinking Eleanor was oblivious. I didn't know her silence wasn't indifference, but observation. Every secret smile, every time I flinched and hid my phone, was another item added to the indictment she was building in her mind. I could never have imagined the scale of her preparation. While I was drunk on promises of a bright future with Tiffany, Eleanor was taking action. She didn't scream. She didn't question. Instead, she hired a private investigator. While I was having a romantic dinner with Tiffany in some restaurant, a stranger was taking our picture from across the street. Every time I entered Tiffany's hotel room, it was documented. The cruelest part wasn't that she discovered the affair. The cruelest part, in a way, was her composure. She continued to play the part of the perfect wife. Breakfast was still served every morning. My shirts were still impeccably ironed. My mother was still cared for diligently. Life at home operated like a well-oiled machine, which only made me more confident in my decision. I thought, see, she can't live without me. Everything will fall apart if I leave. The truth was the complete opposite. She wasn't keeping things stable because she needed me. She was doing it to keep me off guard. She was giving me enough time and space to dig my own grave. I remember the text conversations with Tiffany. I promised her things would change soon. I wrote the most terrible things about Eleanor. I said I was just waiting for my mother to pass away, because Eleanor was the only one who knew how to take care of her. I planned to discard her like an expired tool. I wrote those words with the coldness of an ungrateful man, never knowing that somewhere else, Eleanor herself was reading them, and each letter became another brick in the solid legal fortress she was building around herself. She knew everything, from Tiffany's name and where she lived, to her debts. She knew more about me than I knew about myself, and she was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day I decided to talk to Eleanor, I thought I was the one in control. I came home earlier than usual, my heart full of determination and a little fake anxiety. My mother was taking her nap, the house strangely quiet. Eleanor was in the kitchen, the steady rhythm of a knife chopping vegetables echoing. I sat down in my usual chair, watching her back as she moved between the stove and the sink, an image so familiar over 35 years. Then I spoke, beginning my pre-rehearsed speech about finding true love and my right to be happy. I spoke fluently, trying to present myself as a decent man making a difficult decision, not a despicable traitor. Throughout my monologue, Eleanor just listened in silence. That silence, instead of making me feel guilty, made me even more certain she was too weak to fight back. When I spoke about Tiffany, about her simplicity and her undemanding nature, I emphasized it deliberately to hurt Eleanor. I wanted her to see that she had failed, that she was no longer the woman I needed. When I finished, instead of the tears I expected, she just let out a long sigh. A sigh that seemed to release the burden of 35 years. Then she looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in years, I felt like she was seeing right through me, not as a husband, but as a subject of study. "Richard," she said, her voice even, "did you ever actually bother to find out what my life was like before I met you?" The question stunned me. Honestly, no. I had never asked about her old job, about her accomplishments. To me, Eleanor's life only truly began when she became my wife. I also never bothered to read the papers she gave me to sign. "You're my accountant. You know best," I'd often say proudly, thinking it was a sign of trust. I didn't know it was a sign of profound ignorance. And then, the truth began to unfold. Not with emotional accusations, but with cold, hard facts on paper. "Miss Davies," Eleanor called. The woman I thought was a part-time assistant walked in and placed a thick file on the table. "What is this?" I asked, a sense of unease creeping in. "This is reality, Richard," Eleanor said, flipping open the first page. "This is the deed to this house. Look at the owner's name." I leaned in, my eyes fixed on the bold print. Eleanor Thorne. Not Eleanor Peterson, not Richard and Eleanor Peterson, just Eleanor Thorne. This is only in your name," I stammered. "Exactly," she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "And the car you drive? The savings accounts? The investment portfolios? All of it is my separate property, protected by something you signed 35 years ago without reading. A prenuptial agreement." Every word she spoke was like a hammer blow to my head. A prenup? I didn't even remember signing one. I had been so caught up in the wedding, in the prospect of having a beautiful, brilliant wife, that I had overlooked such boring details. And her father, a shrewd real estate mogul long since passed, was apparently still protecting his daughter from beyond the grave. He had left her not just money, but a legal fortress I could never penetrate. I sat there, stunned, in my own kitchen, on a chair in a house that didn't belong to me, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't the chess player. I was just a pawn, about to be sacrificed on Eleanor's board. The initial shock quickly turned to panic, and then to a hopeless rage. "No way!" I yelled, grabbing the documents, flipping through them frantically as if hoping the words would magically change. "We built everything together. I worked my whole life. That's our money." Eleanor just sat there, calmly sipping a glass of water. Ms. Davies, the anonymous lawyer, spoke up coldly, explaining each legal clause with clarity. The prenuptial agreement, separate property, the powers of attorney I had blindly signed over the years. Every word she said was another nail in the coffin of my financial future. "This is illegal! This has to be illegal!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in desperation. "Is it, Richard?" Eleanor finally spoke, her eyes holding a cold pity. "Ms. Davies, would you please explain the legality of the matter to him?" And Ms. Davies did just that, with the precision of a seasoned attorney. Everything was above board. Every signature was mine. Every asset was legally registered in Eleanor's name. If I tried to sue, they had enough evidence to prove I was not only an adulterer, but one who had spent her money on his mistress. I had absolutely no chance of winning. As the bitter truth seeped into every cell, I felt my body go limp. I had lost everything. The house, the car, the savings. Everything I had proudly called mine, the fruits of the provider's labor, had never belonged to me. I was just a tenant in Eleanor's world, a world I never truly belonged to. Then Eleanor's tone suddenly softened. "You know, maybe I'm being too harsh," she said, her voice gentler. "This is all very sudden for you. How about this? You go stay somewhere else for a while, and in a few days, we can sit down and talk calmly." A flicker of hope ignited within me, a stupid flicker of hope. I thought she still had feelings, that she was just angry and I could still win her over. Okay. I quickly grabbed onto that lifeline. "I'll go to a hotel for a few days. We both need time to calm down." "Of course," she nodded, and I could almost see a faint smile on her lips. I didn't go to a hotel. I drove straight to Tiffany's shabby rented apartment in the suburbs, my heart filled with anger and self-pity. I fell into her arms, ranting about my crazy wife, about how she had frozen all our money. I grandly promised that I would sort everything out soon, that I had rights, that I would get half the assets, and we would soon be living a life of luxury. Tiffany looked at me with an expression of trust and admiration. She believed my story of the wealthy, successful man facing temporary trouble. She didn't know, and neither did I at that moment, that the man standing before her was effectively broke, with a sick, elderly mother and a financial future entirely dependent on the mercy of the wife he had just abandoned. My play had ended, but I was still trying to act out the final scenes in my own delusion. My delusion didn't last long. The wall of reality came crashing down faster than I could have imagined. The first blow came when I tried to use a credit card at a grocery store to buy a few things for Tiffany. "Card declined, sir." I tried another. Same result. A wave of shame and anger washed over me. I called the bank, yelling into the phone, but the response was cold and final. The accounts had been frozen by order of the primary account holder, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. Tiffany started to get restless. The complaints started as hints. "I have to pay the rent. The kids need new books." Soon they became more direct. "You promised you had money, right? I can't carry us both. When are you going to sort things out with your wife?" The romance I had found with her evaporated quickly without the lubricant of money. Her simple, non-materialistic love turned out to have a very specific price tag, one I could no longer afford. In desperation, I tried to go back. I bought cheap flowers, practiced a repentant smile, and knocked on Eleanor's door. "Eleanor, I realize everything," I began my familiar speech. "I was a fool. Tiffany was a mistake. You're the only one, my true one." Eleanor calmly accepted the flowers, put them in a vase, and made me a cup of coffee. We sat in the kitchen, and for a crazy moment, I thought I could turn things around. She listened to me intently, nodding in all the right places, never interrupting. I left with the blind faith that I had almost convinced her that with just a little more effort, she would soften. I didn't know that my every move was part of her plan. The house had been fitted with video and audio recording devices. Every promise of, "I'll give it all up," every vow of, "You're the only one," was carefully documented, becoming evidence of my dishonesty and untrustworthiness. Meanwhile, another front began to crumble. My mother. Without the expensive private insurance, she had to be moved to the public health system. Crowded clinics, weeks-long waits for appointments, doctors who only had a few minutes for each patient. She was furious, calling me constantly, screaming that I had let that madwoman ruin her life. "Where is my son?" she shrieked over the phone. "Why do I have to suffer like this while he's off having fun somewhere?" Backed into a corner, I decided to play the part of the dutiful son. I brought my mother to live with me in Tiffany's cramped apartment. "Let him have a taste of it." I could almost hear Eleanor's voice in my head. And a taste I got. In just 3 nights, I understood the hell Eleanor had lived in for 30 years. I had to wake up in the middle of the night to help my mother to the bathroom, take her blood pressure, and listen to her incessant complaints and demands. By the 4th day, I looked like I had aged a decade. I returned to Eleanor's house and practically collapsed onto a kitchen chair. "I don't understand," I gasped. "How did you put up with this for all those years?" Eleanor just shrugged. "I got used to it." That simple answer hurt more than a slap. It showed how her sacrifice had become normalized, something I had never truly acknowledged. And now, faced with just a fraction of that burden, I had crumbled. The walls of reality had completely closed in on me, and there was no escape. While I was spiraling in the chaos of my own making, Eleanor had begun a new life. She was no longer the woman in a worn-out nightgown I once knew. She got a new hairstyle, chic and sophisticated, which highlighted her grey streaks with pride instead of hiding them. She bought new clothes I had never seen her wear, outfits that accentuated the figure of a powerful woman. But the biggest change wasn't external. It came when I received a lavishly printed invitation card. It was an invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Thorne Development Group. The host? Vivian Thorne. I had to read the name over and over. Vivian Thorne. Ah, Eleanor, her middle name. a name I rarely used. And Thorn Development Group. It must be some mistake. In my ignorance, I saw it as an olive branch. I thought she wanted to reconcile, to have us appear in public as a couple. My mother thought so too. "See," she said triumphantly, "she'll have to come crawling back to you. She's showing you off. It's not over yet." We didn't know it wasn't an invitation, but a summons. We weren't guests of honor. We were front-row spectators at the sentencing of our own fates. That night, I wore my best suit, but it looked cheap and out of place among the expensive tuxedos of the other men in the lavish hotel ballroom. I pushed my mother in a wheelchair, a ploy for sympathy, as she could still walk with a cane at home, and tried to make small talk. But I quickly realized I was completely out of my depth. They spoke of projects, deals, and investment portfolios I had never heard of. And then Eleanor entered. The entire room seemed to pause. She wasn't the wife I knew. She was a queen. In an elegant evening gown, with subtle jewelry and an aura of confidence radiating from within, she commanded every eye. I rushed over, trying to take her arm as if we were still a couple. "Eleanor, you look amazing," I mumbled. She gently removed my hand. "Richard, just a moment," she said, her voice even. "I need to greet my guests." And she glided past me, leaving me standing alone in the crowd, feeling for the first time like a complete outsider. The climax of the evening came when an older man, an old business partner of her father's, took the stage. He spoke about the purpose of the evening, and then he introduced the main event. "A woman who for many years has deliberately remained in the shadows, even as she built a massive enterprise. Please welcome Vivian Thorn, owner and CEO of the Thorn Development Group, one of the most influential and wealthiest women in our city." The room erupted in applause. I sat there, frozen. My mother's jaw dropped. Eleanor walked onto the stage. On the large screen behind her, images of skyscrapers, residential complexes, and shopping centers began to appear. These were buildings I passed every day, but I never knew they belonged to my wife's company. She spoke about her father, about how she had taken over and grown his legacy. She spoke about projects, about social responsibility. And then, she looked directly at my mother. "I know all too well what it feels like to grow old and become a burden," she said. She then announced a donation of $500,000 to the city's nursing homes. $500,000. That was more than I had earned in the last 5 years combined. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a party. This was Eleanor Thorne's coronation. And it was also Richard Peterson's death sentence. Everyone in that room now knew who I was. The useless husband of a phenomenal woman. The fool who tried to throw away a fortune he didn't even know existed. I barely slept that night. The image of Eleanor on stage, confident and powerful, haunted my mind. The next morning, I went to her office for our scheduled appointment. It wasn't the small, makeshift office I had imagined. It occupied an entire floor of a downtown skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Chicago. It was a world I never knew existed. A world my wife had secretly built while I was busy with business trips and sordid affairs. I was made to wait, only for a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. She was making me taste what it felt like to be the one waiting for a handout. When I was finally allowed in, she didn't stand up. She just looked up from a stack of papers and regarded me as she would a stranger. "Good morning, Richard. Please, sit." I sat in the chair opposite her, feeling small and pathetic. "Do we really have to do this, Eleanor?" I began in a pleading tone. "We can settle this like adults." "That's exactly what we're doing," she cut me off. Then Miss Davies entered, placing another thick file and an envelope on the desk between us. "Open it," Eleanor commanded. Inside the file were the prepared divorce papers. Following them was a detailed list of assets. Next to each item, the house, the cars, the stocks, the real estate, was the cold, simple text, "Owner, Vivian Thorne." Next came the photos. Me and Tiffany, at restaurants, in hotels, accompanied by credit card statements, proving I had used her money to pay for it all. "You had me followed," I whispered, disgusted with myself. "I gathered facts," she corrected. "Facts about how you used my money for your mistress." She pointed to the envelope. "Open that one too." Inside was a check and a short statement. "What's this?" "That is the amount of money you actually earned and contributed to the household over 35 years, she explained. "My accountants have calculated everything, subtracting what you wasted on your entertainment. It's yours. I have no intention of taking what you earned honestly." The number on the check was substantial for an ordinary person, but compared to her fortune, it was a drop in the ocean. "What about my mother?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What are you going to do about her?" "Your mother is no longer my responsibility," she said, without a hint of hesitation. "I'm giving you 1 week. 7 days to get her out of my house. You want her to live well? To have good insurance? You pay for it." "You're going to throw a sick old woman out on the street," I yelled, clinging to the last shred of moral high ground. "I'm giving you time and money, Richard. That's more than generous. She is your mother. You are responsible for her." She pushed a pen towards me. "Sign. Take your money. Take your mother. And live your life. But live it without me." I looked at the pen, at the file, at the check. Every road was blocked. Every escape route was gone. I could refuse to sign, try to fight it in court, waste the last years of my life in a hopeless legal battle. But the outcome would be the same. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. I signed. I signed the divorce papers. I signed the agreement relinquishing all claims to her assets. I signed the death warrant on 35 years of marriage. 35 years of deceit and blindness. As I wrote the final signature, the pen slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the desk with a dry, final sound. I looked up at her, my eyes empty. The woman sitting across from me was both the person I'd spent most of my life with and a complete stranger. And in that moment, I knew that the Richard Peterson I once was dead. All that was left was a failed old man with a check and a bleak future. Life after that signature was a relentless downward spiral. As she had said, I had 1 week. My mother and I had to move into a small, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood. The money from the check, while seemingly large, was quickly devoured by rent, security deposits, and countless bills. The life of a successful businessman was over, replaced by the harsh reality of counting every penny. Tiffany disappeared from my life as quickly as she had appeared. When she learned there would be no half of the assets, only a broke old man with a nagging mother, her admiration vanished. She left to find another Richard Peterson, one who actually had money, not one living in a fantasy. I didn't blame her. In the end, I was just a bad investment for her. Life with my mother became a living hell. Without Eleanor there as a buffer, all of her irritability, complaints, and demands were directed at me. I had to work, care for her, and manage everything. My health deteriorated. I quickly realized I couldn't do it. With a heavy heart and boundless shame, I had to place my mother in a state-run nursing home. It was a clean but soulless place. She lived in a shared room with 3 other people, with standard meals and scheduled care. Every time I visited, I saw the resentment in her eyes. She could have lived her final years in luxury, but her son's stupidity had robbed her of it all. Meanwhile, I would occasionally see news about Eleanor, or rather, Vivian Thorne. Her name appeared in business magazines, on television channels. She expanded her company, launched social housing projects, and established a charitable foundation to help women who were victims of financial abuse. She traveled the world, joined clubs, and lived a vibrant life that I could have been a part of. Once, we ran into each other at a shopping center. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, holding a basket full of medication for my mother. I had aged considerably, my back stooped, my clothes shabby. She, in contrast, looked incredible, full of life. She saw me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a distant politeness. "Hello, Richard," she said. "Hello, Eleanor," I replied. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I lied. "My mother, she's not doing so well." "I know," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "That's your responsibility." Then she gave a slight nod and walked away. Watching her leave, I didn't feel anger or jealousy, just an immense emptiness and boundless regret. I had it all: a smart, beautiful, loyal, and incredibly wealthy wife. But I was too blind to see it. I had traded a diamond for a piece of temporarily sparkling glass. Now, nearing 70, I live alone in a small apartment, working a low-paying sales job to get by. Every night, I think about the past 35 years. I didn't just lose wealth. I lost a partner, a companion, a phenomenal woman who had loved me despite my flaws. I had the chance at an amazing life, but I threw it away for my selfish ego and foolish complacency. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about justice. Eleanor didn't get revenge on me. She simply took back what was hers and let me face the consequences of my own choices. And the price of blindness, I can tell you, is a lifetime of loneliness and regret.